you don't know who I am, I'm Sophia Amoruso, founded a couple companies, started one called Nasty Gal, wrote a book called Girlboss, you might have heard of it, and today I spend my days investing in founders, helping founders and helping use all of the things that I've learned along the way to harvest that for a new generation, many of which I know are in the room today. So I have my own fund, it's called Trust Fund. It's about 2 years old, and that's what I do for a living, for the most part. So before I became an investor, I started a couple companies, which I might have mentioned. And if you know my story, you might also know that I bankrupted a company that I built to over $100 million in revenue. And so you might be thinking, why the hell would the Next Web invite somebody who blew it building a $100 million company onto the stage? Well, they wanted me to talk about unconventional routes to entrepreneurship. And as I share my story, I think you'll understand why one of mine is one of the most unconventional of the people who will stand on the stage today. I tried to smash capitalism. I thought I could avoid work somehow when I was a teenager and in my late teens and early 20s, and now it's in my title, which is a really weird thing. So my story begins looking pretty normal. I look like a pretty normal kid, right? There's pastel colors in the background. We live in San Diego. I think my mom cut my hair. But the fact is that there's nothing normal about me, and that's cool. I'm into it. It was really hard as a kid. Somehow it worked out. Like, I'm weird. I've always been weird. I'll always be weird. Kind of hope that you're weird. If you do consider yourself, anybody consider them, come on, please. Yes! Fucking weirdos. Awesome. So yeah, it looked a little bit more like this. So here I am, I don't know what, 4 years old. I'm in school, I'm learning to finger paint. I'm also learning how to go to the bathroom. I don't know, maybe you learn that at 3, I have no idea. But I'm caught in the bathroom finger painting with my own poop. So that's how weird it starts, yep. And here I am, I'm a weird 15-year-old. I'm homeschooling, I hate high school. I'm working the lunch rush for the Intel employees. There's like an Intel plant in my town. And I'm getting OCD on the BLT, making sandwiches like you've never seen before with my green visor and my little shirt. They give you like one shirt, you had to like wash it every day, like tuna on my shirt. All right, so now I'm out of high school, still trying to live on the fringes of capitalism. And it turns out that you can go shopping behind restaurants and grocery stores and find food that's totally fresh. Like a bagel shop will, at the end of the day, put all the bagels in a plastic bag, seal up a sterile bag of bagels, and like leave it out for people like me at this point. So I think I'm living large. My house was not a happy place. I moved out when I was 17. The first place I lived, some of these faces are like horrified. Just listening. So the first place I moved was a closet under the stairs, kind of like Harry Potter. My rent was $60 a month. I painted it purple. I think I slept in a sleeping bag, but like I was stoked. I was like living the way I wanted to, lived with some cool dudes in downtown Sacramento. Eventually they got evicted and I had to move out, so I moved to Olympia, Washington. I had been going to the Anarchist Book Fair in San Francisco for years. So I'm dumpster diving. I'm trying to live outside of the, powers that be, and I'm like, I don't want to work for the man. And I became the man, whatever. So you may not know this, but the first thing I sold online was actually stolen, but it wasn't a dress, it was a book. It was a lot of books. So there weren't really a lot of places to resell things on the internet. I don't even know if eBay had become a thing, but there were Amazon resellers. Amazon, I think, only sold books at the time. And I learned that you could just go into a bookstore and like go to the front and find the bestsellers and walk out with a stack like you own the place, and nobody is going to stop you because you like look like you work there. Like if you do shit like this, like they're going to follow you. So I would just get like huge stacks of books and like walk out, put them on Amazon, sell them overnight, and pay my $350 a month in rent. All right, this isn't in my book, but still funny. Still trying to do as little as I can. Now I'm living in Portland with an alcoholic fry cook named Wade. Still stealing, and decide, like, whatever, I'll do this thing. So in Portland, there's more strip clubs per capita than anywhere in the country. It's like working in a coffee shop. They're really like not like gross places. They're fun. And I got to listen to music that I liked, and I got really comfortable with my body, which is cool, because before that I was like, would make out with somebody and like go to the bathroom wearing, like taking the sheet with me. I was like, ew, nudity. So still trying to evade capitalism, but I don't have a photo of myself getting arrested. Eventually I did, for stealing shit. I think there's like a George Foreman grill, there's like a basketball. I think I had some tampons in there, that shit's expensive. And I realized that I was not in control of my life. I was trying to live outside of the system, but now here I am, like, in the control of somebody else. So I cleaned up my act. I still wasn't necessarily ambitious, but I left Wade in Portland, and I put all my stuff in a U-Haul, and I drove my ass to San Francisco. And I was like, I want to go to art school. I wanted to be a photographer. I'm actually a pretty decent photographer, but I've only taken a lot of pictures for eBay. That's okay. It didn't pan out. And so I applied to a bunch of art schools, and I got into two of the best ones, SFAI in San Francisco, and then CCA also in San Francisco and Oakland, and I was stoked. But it was $50,000 a year. I didn't have $50,000. I didn't have $5,000. And my parents were like, it was like a mess going through like a divorce, and they didn't have $50,000. So art school didn't really pan out. And then I worked 3-month stints. I'm really actually employed. I think I got fired like every 3 months, but there's a record store and a shoe store and a photo lab. Love looking at other people's photos, like so weird to just like peep other people's photos. And then I'm selling weird hats to Burning Man people on Haight Street, and I'm just like, speaking of hate, sorry. But I made it into art school, just not as a student. I made it into art school checking student IDs in the lobby of the Academy of Art University in downtown San Francisco, telling students to go to the second floor for admissions, and sitting on the internet. So I was trying to optimize like the largest margin between effort and pay, and the pay was like maybe $10, $12 an hour or something, but like I kind of thought I was winning at this point. So I had a lot of time to kill, and I was getting MySpace friend requests from eBay sellers who were selling vintage clothing. I wore vintage clothing. I knew where to find it. I knew where to find it cheap. And I was like, all right, maybe I can do this. So I quit my lobby job, got my internet connection fired up, moved into my boyfriend Gary's house in San Francisco, and went hunting for vintage. And the first stuff that I sold was stuff that was mine. I thought everybody would like my style. I thought my style was like great, but it turns out that you can start a company and build what you think people want, but if it's not what people want, like, you don't have a company. And I didn't have any backstop, and I was like determined not to work for anybody. And so this is me still trying to like escape working. And I became like a CEO on accident. I don't know how that worked. And so I called it Nasty Gal after this album called Nasty Gal, written by a woman named Betty Davis, who was allegedly too wild for Miles Davis. They were married for a time. Her spirit is very much in line with the spirit of Nasty Gal, the brand that I ended up creating. She's a total freak, a total weirdo, very unconventional. And I started the store. Nothing sold. The first stuff did not sell. I know Nasty Gal had its success story. And again, like I learned as I went, but I kept studying and I kept learning, and I watched my competitors, and I saw their listings close and the prices things were selling for, and I went and found that stuff, but I made it different and I made it my own. Everything was like hippy dippy, like, you know, girls, whatever, I don't know what, like paisley hippie dresses. And I was like, I'm gonna call it Nasty Gal. That's crazy. And somehow it worked. And so after Years of iterating, 16-hour days, steaming clothing, pulling snot rags out of dead people's, pockets, weighing things, measuring things, shipping things, describing things. Nasty Gal eventually kind of exploded. This is in our warehouse a little while later. And eventually I saved $1 million. You can see here that I have a credit limit of $2,500. I have $50 on my credit card. My personal account has something like, I don't know what, almost $10,000 in it, which is like, wow. And the company has almost $900,000 in it, and this is during holiday season in 2010. And by 2011, we were doing $6.5 million in revenue. Well, no, $12 million in revenue on a run rate, a 12-month forward-facing run rate of $28 million. Debt-free, no investors, just like printing money, flipping clothes. And that's when venture investors came in, and they were like, who is this freak? Like, it was an associate reached out from Index Ventures, Martin, who's, I think, a partner now, found me, asked me some questions, told them the truth. I had never made a presentation in my life. Actually, this is the first keynote I've ever given, just so you know. I do fireside chats. I'm an introvert, and maybe I'm lazy or something, but like this is actually a really big deal for me. I had never made a deck. They made the deck. They propped me up in front of the partnership, and they were like, "Tell the truth. Just talk through the deck." And I did, and they gave me fucking $50 million. So like, maybe irresponsible on their part, definitely naive on my part. And the mandate was to build $1 billion business. They valued us at $350 million when we hadn't even done $28 million in revenue. So this is like a 10x valuation for like a fashion e-commerce company. And it was a different time. Like it was not called direct to consumer. It was called e-commerce. So we hired 100 employees in a year. It was a mess. I hired a bunch of C-level executives. I had no idea how to manage them. I'd never worked in an office before. I thought I would hire these people who had careers for longer than my entire lifespan, and that they'd show up and they'd diagnose what the company needed, they'd work together, and then they'd do things that I didn't know how to do. But it turns out, I'm not a scientist, but like quantum theory tells us that things that are observed behave differently than things that aren't observed, and the same thing is the case for people who you pay hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to. But I learned this the wrong way. So we rounded up, and that year, and again, like, there's like grown-ups around me. They were like, let's round up by $100 million, and we're gonna do $128 million next year. So this was like a freak show, right? Like, this hadn't been done before. Now it's 2012. This is the National Enquirer, which is the sister magazine to the Weekly World News, that if you've ever seen it, is still trying to convince people that Bat Boy is real. So to say my story is unconventional, it's like, they're basically saying like, you're a freak, right? You don't belong. And the fact is that I didn't belong. I didn't mean to be a CEO. I wasn't trying to work for other people. And obviously this is all very sensational, but they only had part of the story. And I was like, my story is like kind of entertaining. And I know there's other community college dropouts, women, wherever, all over the place, who might want to start a business, who don't know that you don't have to have a business degree or carry a briefcase or be a dude to start a business. So I embraced my story, and I decided to tell it. And I wrote a book called Girlboss. This book spent 18 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. It sold 500,000 copies, and this woman embraced it, right? She shared it with friends. I signed like dog-eared copies with like, annotations over the years. There's nothing better than like a well-worn book when someone brings one to a book signing to be like, oh my God, you've really spent time with this thing. That's amazing. And around the time this book was published, Nasty Gal's doing $100 million in revenue. That really did happen. My story's out there for the world to see and judge in every bookstore and airport in the country, and then eventually, like most of the world. So yeah, it hit the list. And And these women realized, like, holy shit, I can do something. Like, I have an internet connection. I don't have a traditional background, but it kind of gave license to a generation who had like never seen this happen before. And I started before there was like a cloud or APIs or Zaps. Obviously, before AI had become popular, there was no Shopify. Squarespace existed, but like nobody had ever heard of it. To build a product page, I had to have an engineer slice up a Photoshop file and hard code an add to cart button to the website. Like that's what building an e-commerce website was like at the time. So they had so much more. They called the book Lean In for Misfits. It was a year after Lean In had come out. And then Charlize Theron gets a copy of the book. Like, wow, Hollywood. Like, I didn't move to LA to be in Hollywood. But this is what agents do. They package things. So this celebrity gets a copy of it, reads it, and she's like, shit, like, let's sell this to Netflix. And I was like, okay, cool. So we went to Netflix, and Ted Sarandos bought it in the room. So now they're making this series about my life. I'm a poster child of entrepreneurship. And while this all looks like everything's like up and to the right, it wasn't. Like, there was a lot of shit happening behind the scenes. So I'm just going to use this like internet word, trauma bonding. But behind the scenes, like, things were rough, right? I'm a young woman. I have no education, no experience. I've never managed anybody. I had very few mentors, very few peers. I had a board, but I heard boards sucked. So I owned 80% of the company after we raised $50 million. So I controlled the board, and I had 2 seats, and my investor from Index had 1, and I controlled the empty one, and that was it. Like, that was my board. I wasn't trying to control things. I was just like, I don't want people I don't know to meddle, and I didn't really know anybody that I wanted to put on the board. So there weren't a ton of people giving me guidance at the time. And revenue begins to plateau. We go through our first round of layoffs later in 2014, the same year the book was published. And all of a sudden, I'm like not a girl boss, and I'm like a toxic leader because I'm like not an example of like, I don't know, whatever I had signed up to do, which I didn't realize I had signed up to do. So I was like, fuck this, I want to hire a CEO. I hate this job. I want to be creative, and I want to be in the weeds. And Forbes slaps me on the cover. They say I'm one of America's richest self-made women because I own a lot of this company that's worth a lot of money. They said I was richer than Beyonce, which is really funny. I'm not. And it was really lonely. So, like, actually, this is super lonely because I was photographed alone, and then they superimposed these women into the photo. I also returned the dress that I wore on the cover of Forbes. And I didn't mention I'd gotten married or whatever, bought myself an engagement ring. I can manifest anything. I was like, surprise me. We were together for like 5 years, and he like bailed after 8 months. So all this shit was happening at the same time. It really sucked. And then eventually, after Hail Mary, being overvalued, some meddling, stories that I'll share with the founders that I invest in. Nasty Gal files for Chapter 11 at the end of 2016, just like 6 months after I'm on the cover of Forbes. I'm in Australia. I'm promoting my book, Nasty Galaxy, and I step on stage as headlines are breaking, and I'm being interviewed not about being an inspirational leader, but the fact that my company was falling apart. And I cried, and I said, I did my best, and 1,000 women in the room cried along with me. So Forbes just is total whiplash. And there's these headlines like, does the failure of Nasty Gal mean millennials aren't ready to lead? Like, I was like this weird example of an entire generation. Like, I didn't know I had signed up for this responsibility. So it was like so much more than just like a personal failure or a single company. It was like holy shit, like they're questioning like everybody in this room, like if you're ready to lead because like I fucked up, like. So I started over. I'm running out of time. Put myself on stage, decided like I'm gonna start another company called Girlboss. It became a media company. Raised $1.5 million from Lightspeed. They led our seed round. Kevin Systrom spoke, the founders of Glossier, in a way, and Outdoor Voices showed up. And everybody showed up to support me, which is weird. I thought I was like doomed, right? I'm like, I don't know what, 30, divorced, like smeared, not a girl boss. But the fact is that because I was out there and I stayed out there, people kept showing up for me. And then Netflix comes out, and this was like not a good time because it was being filmed when like everything was great. Hillary had lost. The conversation about women in the workplace has gotten like really serious and political in a way it hadn't before. This story is not an example of like women in the workplace, right? Like, but it was like held up as an example of like what that should be. So after I've left my company, my story of who I was when I was 22, starting an eBay store, is blasted into 130 million homes in 195 countries in almost every language, everywhere in the world, and it's just this like, identity crisis. It's like, am I any of those things? Was I any of those things? Like, will I ever be any of those things? Am I a joke? And there's headlines like, the biggest problem with Netflix's Girlboss is its source material. Like, that's me. Like, I'm the biggest problem. Like, that's nuts. Like, my personal life and my personal experience is now being basically crucified on a public stage. I mentioned Girlboss raised $1.2 million, and I finally got some good press. I had a really good prenup. So weird. TMZ has an office inside of the courthouse where they like look for divorce filings. I'm not really TMZ material, but this was funny. And I posted this on my Instagram, and the caption was, "Best press I've had in a while." I started angel investing, and then in 2020, I launched something called Business Class during COVID. So I sold Girlboss at the end of 2019. 2020, COVID happened. I left. And it's a course for entrepreneurs that I still do, that I bootstrapped. I have one employee, super nimble. The level of my ambition literally is like capped at the number of employees I want to have, and I'm not shooting low. It's just like, I'm not good at that, and I don't want to do it. So there's this great quote by someone I have never read their book, but it's, "You did not come back from hell with empty hands." And so I kept going. I came back with a shitload of knowledge, an amazing network, people that kept showing up for me. Like, I blew $50 million. And Mark Andreessen and Jason Calacanis and Andrew Chen and David Sachs like all showed up to invest in my fund, which is pretty nuts. I kept showing up, and other people kept showing up for me. And so there's a few takeaways that I want for you to have today. And one of them is just flipping the script from telling yourself, I don't belong here, to like, I don't belong here. Like, that's awesome. Like, this wasn't made for me. Like, I'm gonna break the mold, right? I broke the mold when I was born, and you did too. So turning imposter syndrome into something that you can celebrate. Like, I'm a punk. Like, I came in the back door, and if everybody can have that thinking, you'll be able to build something audacious, which is what everybody is here to do and talk about. Also, your story gives people permission to be themselves. So I shared my story. I didn't know that the shitty part was going to be out there for the world as well. But when you share your story, it gives other people permission to blow it too, and to blow it in public. So my advice is also to build in public, both your company and yourself. And also just like take big swings. If you say you're done, you're done. But if you keep showing up, people are going to keep showing up. It's why I love investing in second-time founders. And then when all else fails, if you have a chip on your shoulder, just use spite, right? When someone says you can't do something, I say, watch me, and I still do. And so I know Beetlejuice, this is my last slide, you have to say Beetlejuice's name 3 times for him to go away. There's no number of times that you can say my name and I'm gonna go away. Like, I'm a cat with 1,000 lives. So no matter what, I'm not going anywhere. There's the internet. I have a website and an email address. If you want to invest in my fund, it's hello@trustfund.vc. And if you want to pitch me your company, it's there's a form on my website. And I'm done promoting myself and humble bragging. Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.